If you listen to Chinese authorities, they're the fastest rising power in the world, growing their military by leaps and bounds and expanding their influence around the world. If you listen to worried politicians in the United States, you'll probably hear the same thing. They all say it could be a Chinese century, but the actual truth might be very different. Is China, the world's largest country by population, actually on the verge of collapse? One of the reasons China should be worried about their ascendance to superpower status might be right there in the title, world's largest country. It's not going to hold that title for long, maybe not even for another year, because while China has been the most populous country for hundreds of years, that streak is about to come to an end. India will overtake it as the world's most populous country in the near future, and trends indicate that it won't be overtaken anytime soon. That in itself doesn't mean China's falling apart, but the facts behind it are worrying. China's population has been a subject of concern for leadership for a long time. During the early days of the Communist Party's rule, the growing population taxed limited resources extensively. So in 1980, the government instituted a one-child policy that lasted 35 years. Backed up by extensive propaganda campaigns, it was an efficient way to cut down population growth. This required massive government oversight, including arrests of couples who had illegal second children and in some cases confiscation of children. But the government of China was not receptive to protests and the policy stuck, forcing couples to make hard choices that included many people choosing to terminate pregnancies when they were having a girl because if they could only have one child, they wanted a strong, strapping young lad who could help them around the farm. And that pattern created a worrisome effect. Although the one-child policy was abolished eventually, and now China actively seeks to raise its birth rate, it caused a generation of damage to the country's demographics, with a much larger number of boys to girls born. It made it hard for young men to find wives, and the government first started to try to account for this in the 1980s, allowing rural parents to have a second child after having a girl. And the one-child limit was eventually replaced with a two-child limit, then a three-child limit, before being abolished completely in 2021. But decades of oppression caused lasting effects. Families in China have largely gotten used to having few children, and many are sticking to the numbers they're used to. As China's population ages and dies off, the country has seen record low population growth, barely making it above replacement level in the last few years. The trend is likely to continue barring something unexpected, which means China might become one of the few countries in the world to see an actively shrinking population. But population isn't everything these days. Many of the most powerful countries in the world aren't even in the top 10 population-wise. That's the good news. The bad news is everything else. If there's one word that could normally be used to describe China's government, it is stable. It's one of the longest-lasting communist governments in the world, with the Chinese Communist Party ruling consistently since the country's civil war in 1949. Its various leaders had different perspectives and left the country in various shapes, but they all answer to the larger party structure, which has never come close to being toppled. They set the law with very little room for input from the people, leading to many protests being put down by force, as was most famously seen in the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. And absolute power also means the dissidents have nowhere to hide. The CCP might not be exclusively communist anymore. They've opened up their country to business interest extensively, which greatly contributed toward their economical prosperity. But little has changed in the way they govern the nation. They crack down on any sign of dissent, and no one is safe. From random protesters to powerful business executives, they've even made their oppression high-tech with advanced surveillance techniques and a social credit system that penalizes people for signs of disloyalty to the government. The goal is to make the price of defiance too high for anyone to risk going against the government's wishes. But if people are pushed far enough, could the CCP remain in power? Many of China's issues have been brewing for a long time, but they largely exploded in 2020. China was ground zero for the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you ask 10 people, you probably get 15 answers about what they think really happened. But what is known is that as soon as the virus was detected in China, the government cracked down, isolating whole cities and large-scale lockdowns that kept people trapped in their homes or in government quarantine camps for extended periods of time. The containment strategy caused much controversy, but it was initially effective and helped China get its cases much lower than the rest of the world, at least so far as we know. And then COVID-19 went away and everything was fine. Right? If there's one thing we know, it's that COVID is persistent. Most countries came out of their initial lockdowns and the virus came roaring back. It was clear they couldn't lock down every time an increase in cases were detected, so instead many countries concentrated on the measures like mask mandates and vaccination drives. But in China, there was no public pushback against draconian lockdown laws, and China instead decided to continue harsh lockdown strategies every time a case was reported, a strategy which continued into 2022. Many cities like Shanghai have been the subject of this treatment, including most famously Shanghai Disneyland being closed down, with many of the people in the park being moved to a nearby quarantine camp on site. So much for the happiest place on earth. To say the public was angry would be putting it lightly. For the first time since 1989, the Chinese government was potentially facing a protest it couldn't simply put down. Mass numbers of protesters took to the streets in 2022, expressing outrage at how they'd been treated, with many complaining of being unable to get food or medical treatment due to the COVID protests. China cracked down, of course, but current leader Xi Jinping was hesitant to order a full crushing of the protests like his predecessor did in Tiananmen Square. Maybe he was worried about his global reputation, or maybe he just knew it wouldn't work. Because this wave of protesters were savvy, modern, and knew how to game the system. This well-organized group of protesters were using the internet, including social media sites like Twitter, to mobilize. China's cyber experts tried to sabotage this by flooding the related tags with spam and pornography. They also had an interesting choice of protest sign, with many carrying blank pieces of paper. This was ostensibly to express how they were being silenced, but it also made it impossible for the government to charge them with carrying seditious messages, because they weren't carrying any messages at all. And suddenly, Xi Jinping started looking a little nervous. The current leader of China had just been elected to a historic third term as the head of the CCP, the first to do so since Mao Zedong. And rather than try to crush the protesters and send a message to the world, he started backing down and liberalized some of the COVID-19 restrictions without actually admitting fault or promising it wouldn't happen again. This was the first indication that China under Xi might be vulnerable to public pressure and would be loosening some of its restrictive policies. But everyone knew this would be a dicey prospect. Any indication that the CCP was weakened might cause the government to reverse course and crack down to preserve its public image. And that's because China would prefer to look outward right now. While China has many conflicts domestically, they're growing by leaps and bounds internationally, or so it seems. While China has the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, it's considered to be much more advanced than Russia, which largely makes it the closest rival to the United States. While Chinese authorities are often belligerent toward the United States, including making over-the-top threats, like shooting down the Speaker of the House's plane if she visits Taiwan, most people believe this is for domestic consumption rather than an actual threat. A war with the United States would likely end in an unimaginable destruction, and most analysts believe the US would be the heavy favorite to win. But China is much more concerned with local affairs. China's activities in the South China Sea have been controversial in recent years, with the country building many manufactured islands and claiming large swaths of the sea as their territory. This has caused domestic conflict with Vietnam in particular, but few of the countries in the region have the military strength or allies to oppose China directly. But far away, China has a very different strategy. China's biggest new investment in recent years has been in Africa, a diverse continent that was heavily colonized by Europe over the centuries, and as such is very open to a new alternative. That alternative came in the form of China, which wanted to set up factories, mining operations, and other investments in multiple African countries. This arrangement provided the locals decently paid jobs, although most of the highest positions were often staffed by Chinese liaisons. Many analysts fear if war breaks out, China could use these business arrangements to cut off supplies from the United States by calling its chips in with African allies. But China's larger business investments might soon have been impacted by a looming problem. Remember during the 90s when it suddenly seemed like everything was made in China? It didn't matter if it was a plastic cup, a sweater, or a new piece of electronic. China seemed to be the place to get things made, to the annoyance of many a grandpa who wanted to know whatever happened to good old-fashioned American manufacturing. Well, that factory's likely long closed down, Granddad. Companies moved much of their manufacturing to China thanks to the lower cost of manufacturing and less red tape. But that often meant some corners were cut along the way. This manufacturing boom helped China's economy explode, and soon they became powerhouses in countless other areas, including movie making and app design. But it might all be about to come crashing down. The Chinese business boom only lasts as long as foreign companies are comfortable doing business with them, and to a large extent, that golden era is over for a number of reasons. A good test case is Disney, who invested heavily and prioritized the Chinese market. They even built that theme park there. But the honeymoon was over when China's censorship bureau started demanding changes to completed films to allow them to be released in China. That's why many recent Marvel movies haven't even been released in China, including the first MCU film starring an Asian hero, Shang-Chi. And other businesses have become increasingly hesitant too. Having an outpost in China used to be a great investment, but due to the government's recent crackdowns, it's become much dicier. There were several high-profile detentions of foreign business travelers and journalists that made it seem like too big of a risk to send people there. Additionally, more attention was paid to China's cyber hacking and data mining efforts, particularly the mega-popular Chinese app TikTok. While all the kids are filming their dances and posting their hot takes, China might be mining their data, which even led multiple politicians to call for banning the app in the United States outright. And even that good old Made in China sign might have had its best days behind it. Manufacturing in China is still definitely the cheaper option, but the ethics are becoming more worrisome, especially given how many of China's factories are staffed by prisoners and who those prisoners are. The internment of the Uyghur Muslim minority and other religious minorities and dissidents has gained a lot of attention over the years, but never more so than it did in 2018, when an American woman opened a Halloween kit from Kmart, and in addition to a bunch of fake skulls and plastic headstones, she found a piece of paper. It contained a message from a prisoner in a labor camp detailing the brutal conditions they endured. More and more people are asking if that cheap knick-knack is worth the human cost. And all this creates a potentially grim picture for China going forward. If China loses much of its foreign investment, is its domestic situation steady enough to keep itself afloat, or will it collapse like a house of cards? The challenge for China is that many of its problems intersect, and if one area collapses, it could make it impossible for them to keep another area under control. Experts in Chinese society are all united in saying that the country could face a period of crisis and decline in the near future. For one thing, their COVID policy might make it near impossible to recover. Most Americans remember the long, dark days of 2020 when many people didn't know when or if their businesses would be allowed to open. That status quo is long gone here, but in China it never ended. A small COVID outbreak could trigger the lockdown of an entire city area, and that could cause countless businesses to close their doors permanently. The zero COVID policy also serves as a body blow to another area, tourism. After all, international travel has gotten trickier since COVID began, and getting in the country is enough of a challenge itself. In China, you have to hope your area doesn't become a hotspot, or getting out could become a challenge too. And another global crisis is also looming. Climate change poses the biggest challenge to coastal and island nations, where the rising sea levels could actually wipe some cities off the map within a century. But every country is experiencing it in some way, especially if they weren't prepared for extreme weather. The province of Sichuan was hit by a massive heat wave and drought in 2022, and the city became heavily dependent on air conditioning to keep functioning. Problem was, the temperate region wasn't equipped for this kind of hit on its power grid, and it caused heavy blackouts. Factories were forced to shut down, many people struggled in the burning heat, and Beijing was forced to respond with massive bailouts to keep the region afloat. Many are asking, is Beijing prepared for what's to come? China's seeing its economy draw down in many ways, including a devastating rollback in its property market. China was investing heavily in building new housing, with many houses being sold while still under construction. But as the economy contracted, construction slowed, and many people found themselves with houses or flats that couldn't be lived in or sold. So people started refusing to make mortgage payments while the houses were incomplete, and that created a real estate crisis that's ongoing. The government provided a major bailout to the real estate sector, but it didn't restore confidence. And many people are asking, is Beijing doing enough? Just about every area of China's economy is struggling right now, including real estate, the tech sector, and small businesses. So in August 2022, China announced an investment of 1 trillion yuan, which is around $200 billion that'll go directly into the economy. But while the infusion of cash was welcome, many people wondered if it was being used effectively, and it doesn't seem like any of the larger issues behind the economic crises are being addressed. And China is still lacking in infrastructure in many areas. Others say the onerous regulations of the Chinese Communist Party are stifling innovation, but no one is sure how fast China will respond. And that raises the question, how bad could things get? China's economic moves to boost its struggling economy have largely been modest, including a cut in interest rates, but it's impossible to separate their economic problems from the other challenges the country is facing. Back in 2008, when the world was hit by a massive economic crisis, China responded much more quickly, unleashing a huge stimulus package that pumped a lot of money into the global economy. That was brought on as much by self-interest as anything else. China's economy was booming at the time, and the leadership knew they had as much to lose as anyone else if the global economy hit a long-standing depression. But this time, the rest of the world is recovering much faster than China is, and China's other policies are contributing to its problems. China is the only country in its economic sphere to still be conducting COVID-19 lockdowns, which means places like South Korea, Japan, and rising powers like India and Vietnam are starting to look much more like inviting places to do business with. This is especially the case for India, where their fast-growing economy and population are making them a regional power, one that looks like a good place for investors. But while there have been some minor signs of liberalization on COVID lately, Xi Jinping has been very hesitant to abandon the initial 2020 strategy, which means that companies will be more hesitant to invest. But China's future might also be shaped by its allies. While China has a massive challenge going into 2023, it's nowhere near the crisis facing another former superpower, Russia. As 2022 opened, Vladimir Putin promoted himself to the title of Tsar of Greater Russia. Many pundits assumed he would run over Ukraine in weeks and then set his sights on NATO. The reality has been very different. Bolstered by NATO weapons, Ukraine has held off Russia and limited them to minor gains in the east. Its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has become a global hero. Meanwhile, Russia's found itself diplomatically and economically isolated, running out of troops and weapons, and a global pariah under massive sanctions. It's almost out of allies. That is, besides one. Aside from fellow pariah states like Syria, Iran, and North Korea, the only major country backing Russia is China. Early in the war, Xi Jinping and Putin signed an agreement of mutual support, and China provided Russia with arms. But as Russia's fortunes changed, China started backing away slowly, not wanting to be associated with Russia's incompetent war. However, it's not clear which direction things are going. If Putin starts looking like he's about to lose the war, will China back him up with more supplies? If they do, would the decrease in investor confidence accelerate the collapse of China's economy? Of course, the big unanswered question about a Chinese economic collapse is how China would react. While China's economy contracts and its reputation around the world declines, its government has actually become more belligerent, conducting war games dangerously close to the island nation of Taiwan, which China has long claimed as part of its territory. The United States has vowed to defend Taiwan, but no one is sure if that promise will be worth the paper it's printed on, especially if China threatens to target the U.S. mainland. So in a situation where China is struggling and its people are outraged, an invasion of Taiwan might be seen by Xi as a way to create a rally-round-the-flag effect that could boost his fortunes. Of course, that depends on one thing: winning. For the strategy to pay dividends for China, they'd have to do what Russia couldn't: win and win quickly. Taiwan has a powerful navy and a lot of willing suppliers. While it's likely the US and its allies would not want to get into a shooting war with the Chinese soldiers in the event of an invasion, they might be willing to supply it in the same way they did Ukraine. And that could create a situation where China's sending the best weapons up against a well-fortified island with powerful backers and expending money and manpower it does not have. And if the world's second-largest economy declines, it's likely to have a devastating effect across the board. China might not be exactly a superpower, but it's one of the most influential countries in the world thanks to its powerful military and deep economic investments. And if COVID lockdowns, inflation, and angry protests continue to destabilize the nation, it's likely that other countries will continue to distance themselves from China and the CCP, leading to a snowball effect. Where will it stop? Just like in the Great Depression, no one's exactly sure, but it'll probably knock over a lot of things along the way. Are you a true believer in China's global reach? Check out China's plan to take over the world for a look at the best-case scenario for the powerhouse nation, or watch China's World War III plan for another look at how things could get out of control.